recording because this is going up on YouTube as well. Welcome everyone to second episode of Hydra's Den. We're going to be going over. I'm here with my host Trent.
Hey there.
Yeah, and we're going to be going over one-shots, what they are, how to play them, and generally why they're basically one of the most amazing things you'll ever use as a DM. Okay. So, just to preface, Trent, what's your sort of experience with D&D, any sort of system, actually?
Okay. I started playing Dungeons and Dragons probably when I was 10 or 11 years old. My father played extensively in university, and he purchased D&D 3.5 Starters Edition. My brother and I played it, and he didn't care for it too much, but I fell in love with it, and I found every opportunity I could to try it. I bought myself a copy of the Player's Handbook in middle school, not knowing I needed the rest of the books and probably not being able to afford them at the time. So that didn't go too well. I didn't have my first, I guess, legitimate group until first year of high school when I played with a number of the guys, and from there I joined the Tangled Web online RPG community, where I participated in a number of play-by-post campaigns and ended up getting into Cyberpunk 2020 and a number of other systems that I've fallen in love with.
Okay, well, yeah, so you've been through all sorts of stuff. So, first things first. I'm going to just preface, I did this last time, but I'd like to go through it each time. I'm going through general advice here. This is going to apply to any system, all systems. Don't assume this is just for D&D, okay? Additionally, I am by no means a master of tabletop RPGs. I'm just a guy with an opinion and a mic. There's plenty of us on the internet. Don't take this as any sort of gospel. I doubt anyone will, but at the same time, please give it some thought. I think I put a decent amount of work into this. And that being said, if you think I'm completely wrong, I don't need a 5-page essay about this. I'm giving out my piece. If you got a better one, you can put it out. This is just general pointers for one-shots, for any sort of small miniature campaign type format. And once again, they're opinions. There's probably a more official terms and titles for what I'm talking about. I'm aware of this. So, let's begin. First things first, what is a one-shot? A one-shot, it refers to any sort of session in a tabletop RPG that hopefully is supposed to be completed in one shot, one sitting. This usually means that you make your characters, you run your characters, and the story's over. It's a small story. Often the characters will be quickly put together, and it'll be just a nice sort of quick and easily contained piece of work. It's first things first, it provides a huge number of advantages for both the GM and the player, in my opinion. The first one really is simply that since a one-shot is a neat, sort of self-contained story, this story is, for the players at least, it's going to be simpler, it's going to be easy to follow. It's going to be something that the players can just kind of jump into and just, nod their heads and go along with it. It's no political intrigue super thriller. It's no epic that's going to span 1,000 years and 1,000 places. But it's nice because, the players can pick up all the sort of story details they need quickly. This is also really nice for the GM because, it means we don't have to put in anywhere near as much work. And you don't have to worry about the players forgetting something that happened a few sessions back. I would highly recommend this to anyone who maybe isn't the most confident in their ability to run a session yet. Anyone who, is just kind of thinking, maybe I'll run this, maybe I won't, I don't know. This is what the one-shot's for, really. It gives you an idea. It gives you an idea of what your sort of friends are going to be like if they play with you. It gives you an idea of your own personal abilities. And in general, it's just fun to go get together with some guys, maybe have a few beers, and just, screw around. With this in mind, I'm going to mention that quite a few of the one-shots I've personally run inevitably will turn into two-shots, two-session games. That's simply due to time constraints. It's not a bad thing, but I would suggest avoiding it if you can. it's going to kill the pacing of your session, just a bit, because if you get halfway through, people are going to forget things. You're just going to lose a bit of your sort of flow. So,
If I may hop in
yep.
for a second.
Go ahead.
One-shots are also great because they can serve as an excellent little introduction to a system. A lot of I guess more, what's the word for it? A lot of the older systems in play, Shadowrun, Cyberpunk, etc., they usually have introductory, like Friday Night Firefight. Savage Worlds in particular has the one-sheet system, which are excellent little things you can download for free off of the Pinnacle Entertainment website.
Okay.
And it just really easy ways to get started with a new system if not everybody's particularly sure of it but are interested in giving it a try.
Yeah, no, you're completely right. It's a great way to test out a system and figure out where everyone stands with it too. With this in mind, like we should probably just move straight into this. The first thing you're going to have to think about when you're working with this is starting up characters, starting up the session, making your characters, and setting the stage. Okay, so once you have wrangled your players, once you have gotten everyone together. Once you've written everything out, of course, we're going to have the opening and introduction for characters. This is challenging, actually, more often than not, because this part is where you are basically putting a bunch of characters who have little to no sort of bonds with each other. I mean, in character, of course. The players may know each other, but their characters have no sort of connection. You're just kind of throwing them into a room, throw them into a tavern or whatever, and telling them just go at it. If you have people who have decided that they adore playing the sort of radical, stupid, chaotic, dumbass rogue archetype or lol random, they're going to be an absolute nightmare in this part because, I mean, nobody has any reason to sit together anyways. So this is where a really important part of the GM is going to be your ability to set everyone together. Really, the best way to do this, I'd say, is to find a sort of plot hook or a connecting theme for the characters. People will sometimes get a little pissy when you do this because they'll accuse you, of railroading. They'll accuse you of giving them sort of a pigeonhole, but honestly, it's a lot more useful, first off for you, but also for them. If someone just is told to make a character, they'll write all sorts of weird stuff. But if you could set up sort of a connecting theme, like let's just say you are all going into a gold rush. You are all adventurers going after a lost sword in the ancient dwarven keep of old. You are all secret agents, part of the same covert organization, and you've been deployed to the same area for a mission. You're all a group of plucky survivors in an airplane crash. Regardless of what this bonding theme is, this is really important and the reason why I'm going to say this is because I've seen people not do this. It's actually awful because if you have people, especially as Trent said earlier, if they're new to the system, that sort of idea that they're going to have to not only figure out the rules, but they're also going to figure out why they care about each other at all. It's going to put a sort of a spanner in the works. It's going to create some friction, and usually not the good kind of friction.
If I may chime in again.
Yeah, go ahead.
So, especially regarding new players, if you have an older player, and hope to God they actually give a shit about the game, I've seen a lot of players in the past collaborate with more experienced players to create sort of joint backstories. It doesn't always work out. It does help with the whole reason for continuing with the group dynamic that you might be trying to set up. Or honestly, not everybody approves of this, but in some of the one-shots I've run in the past, I've built characters for people around an idea they wanted, and I've sort of set them all up as sort of the same group. It depends. It's up to them how they want to play it, but it does help sometimes, especially if people are trying to learn character building.
Oh, no, you're completely right, actually. Just a note on that is if your players don't know the system you're running for this one-shot, it might just be a good idea to pre-make a bunch of character archetypes. And by this, I don't mean a fully fleshed out character with the story and everything, this is where me and Trent might differ. I would say, maybe give them just a little bit of theming, as I'd say, give them all sort of a common cause. But just in terms of, give them the basics in terms of loot, their gear, their basic abilities and traits, all the mechanics that they need to know. Let's just say, in a D&D type game, make a preset warrior template, a wizard template. A lot of these games will actually come with them too. But the reason is because character making is going to be one of the biggest things that slows you down. Like, I've seen a session that's maybe 4 hours long, first 2 hours character building. And, you just wasted half your time. Also, by providing this little archetype, though, this also actually lets you sort of set the stage a bit, because this allows you to provide them with whatever loot you know that they're going to need. They may not know that they need that extra thing of rope, but they're going to need it. So you give them the rope, and it means that they don't have to think of, what else might I need? I might need a torch. I might need a rope. No, you give them it. That's generally what I would say about it. But once the players are all packed up, ready to go, you need to move on from there, right? So you're basically going to need to deliver them a basic story. This is the part 2 of this sort of idea of starting up, and this is the information that the players are going to need to know going into the session. It's not going to be the full representation of what you're going to be facing. You're going to want to add some sort of twist to the story, but you're going to typically provide the players with some few really key pieces of information. These are: where am I? What is the winning condition for this game? And how do I complete this condition? Okay? These, you're not going to, give it to them just straight up in a very obvious form. You'll probably cloak it in story and lore. But if your players are going to investigate a cursed village, they need to know where the village is. They need to know what's the curse in this village, and they need to know how they break the curse. Or at the very least, they need to know what they think, what they sort of like the general vague idea of how to break the curses, Because if you don't give the people an idea of what they're doing, you're just kind of throwing them into a hole. And once again, a one-shot is all about its momentum, it's all about its speed. And if you don't sort of provide them with a piece of that to begin, then you're going to have a lot of time spent sort of talking with NPCs, which isn't bad. It isn't bad, but you need to be able to at least get this information out, I'd say, within the first hour of play. If it isn't immediately presented, make sure your NPCs give the little bits they need. Make sure that with some quick investigating, they can find out what they have. But I'd say within the first hour, make sure that they know those key 3 things. Where am I? What do I need to do to win? And how do I win? And how do I go about completing this sort of win condition? Otherwise, you're just going to confuse people.
That's if you're going off of pillar 1 or 2, but if you're focusing more on like an exploration or narrative feel, then it might help to keep at least the third one a little bit more concealed. I know some of my favorite, these are pre-made modules, mind you. Some of my favorite pre-made modules keep the not necessarily the win condition, but the how you win, as you said earlier, concealed. Not necessarily concealed. It's subtle, so you have to be paying attention to things that are going on, what characters say, certain things in the environment, and obviously that does translate a bit to the whoever's running the game has to be able to convey that information properly. But if it's done right, it can make for a pretty enjoyable experience, especially if you're going for something like a mystery feel.
You're completely right. So one thing that I want to correct actually, is when I said how to complete this game, it's more about you're going to give it really depends on what the game is, first off. But secondly, what you're giving them may not actually be what they need to complete it. Like, when I say complete it, I'm talking about in a purely mechanical point of view. There is a werewolf, kill the werewolf. How do you kill a werewolf? Silver bullet. That's sort of a very straightforward thing. It could be, it turns out it's not a werewolf, it's a vampire. I'm going to talk a bit more about that a bit later, when I come to twist in the action. but that sort of, you need some sort of basic understanding. It could even just be vague, just like the village is suffering from a werewolf attack. The how to stop the werewolf attack is to kill the werewolf. That basically completes those three sort of conditions, but it gives a lot of flexibility. Um, if you want to, that's basically what I'm saying. Is that kind of what you meant, Trent?
Yeah, no, I agree.
Yeah.
It's just some of my favorite. We got a question if you care to answer right now.
Oh yeah, sure. What is it?
How do new people to the game find a group?
How? Ooh.
That's actually kind of a tough one. What I said at the introduction of this stream, and I hope you're still listening, buddy. When I first started playing, I was playing with my father and my brother, but it wasn't until high school. And how I got that started was I just was first talking with the guy about other interests. I think it was Pokemon and Magic cards at the time, and one of them just offhandedly mentioned they were running D&D games. If you don't know people like that, or you don't want to make those sorts of steps to talk to people, and I understand that not everybody's different. If you have a friendly local gaming store, if you have a gaming store near you, it could be like a Games Workshop or something. Just go in, see if people are, see who's there. Maybe one or two people. Sometimes people will advertise a game they're running. That doesn't always turn out well, but if you're looking for a live experience, that's how you can do that. Or traditional games on 4chan has the Game Finder threads. Those turn out half and half, and then there's obviously the Roll20 boards, but I think Hydra from personal experience could tell you those don't exactly go very well.
Yeah, so I'm not so experienced with the sort of real life matchmaking of it, but in terms of New Age, going in from the tech point of view, there is Mythweavers. Mythweavers it's a roll of the dice. Sometimes you'll get good ones, sometimes you'll get bad ones. And then
a little underpopulated in Dungeons and Dragons heavy recently, so if you're looking for something else, you might not have a lot of luck with it.
Yeah, Roll20 on the other hand, you can get anything you want, but oh boy, there's stories I could tell. The problem is that when you go into something like Roll20, I would say the first and most important thing is check how long has the DM been advertising. I made this mistake. I made this terrible mistake of looking into it online and not thinking about the fact that this guy had been through 15 people. Oh, and I very, very quickly realized why he had been through 15 people when me and a friend went in and ended up in a really creepy sort of session. This guy was, he was something else. But the general idea is that he was terrible. He was terrible. He was just not great in any way, shape, or form. And what the sort of idea that I'm trying to imprint on you is keep an eye on the people. And if the DM that you're going in on Roll20 is, Tangled Web. Jeez, I didn't even think of Tangled Web or Fantasy Grounds. But on something like Roll20 at least, where you can find every sort of session, and you wander in there and you feel like this DM is a little off, anything about this DM's advertisement turns you off, run. Do not walk, run. Because while I'm sure you've heard all sorts of hilarious stories about, that guy, you triumphing over the DM and showing him up. The DM's power tripping, so we'll show him up, we'll teach him a lesson. That's a very rare case. Most of the time, you'll just have a very awkward experience. You'll just have a very bad experience. I mean, I was lucky enough that we didn't get too far before the creepy fetish stuff started coming out. Because, yeah, it's one of those. It's one of those stories where we go in thinking that we're going to make a hilarious pair of runaways from Mexico heading into a Japanese high school. And then he starts inserting weird incest stuff, and it was terrible.
Yeah.
Yeah.
One of the other things about online groups, I mean, this is probably common sense, but people tend to have less of a filter online. That doesn't necessarily mean it's a bad thing. Some people are a lot better at role-playing games when they're behind a computer, and they feel a little less embarrassed about acting certain things out. And others will take it as an excuse to be assholes. I've dealt with a number of them before, but it's always a toss-up. You can get that guys in real life too, and sometimes that's actually a lot worse. But whatever.
Yeah. So that's completely true. In terms of actual experience with online play, I'd say Trent has more experience there. I definitely am one of the DMs where I cannot. I'm bad at running in person. I just cannot wrangle players well. So having that online sort of ability to conceal my stuff a bit more, it helps me a lot. You'll find people on both sides of it, and just go into these places. Just be careful. Be careful about what you're looking into, and always remember to check how many people, if you can see it, how many people have left, because that'll usually tell you a very important, bit of information about whether or not you should be here. Back into our one shots though. So from here, oh, by the way, thanks for the question. I'm always free to answer them. And if you stay till the end, we have a Q&A at the end where people can come in and just live talk about it. But yeah, so our next part is about building action, momentum. So this is my term for it. Once again, I am using very improvised terms for this. But the general idea for this little piece is once the players understand the basic rules of what you're doing, once you've gotten to that first hour or so of play, this is where you start giving them some challenge. A good one shot is almost always going to have a sort of movie-like feel. I like to compare it to movies personally, where in terms of how the action is built and how the plot will advance, it's this sort of faster paced. There's these very particular beats about it, I find, where you will have people, at the beginning, people are looking for information, and then you'll have an attack of some sort. You'll have some sort of encounter. It's usually not going to be the main villain, the main evil sort of target of this, but there's always going to be something that gets people's heart rate up a bit, because talking with NPCs is interesting, but you can't spend 4 hours talking with NPCs. So if the players are simply told to gather information, they're also not going to get all the key points you want to convey. Probably, the players are notoriously blind. I'll say blind is probably the best term for it. So once they start not finding all the things that you need them to find, you get a bit of friction, you get a bit of frustration. People are going to start acting dumb. So what you do instead is you throw, let's just say in the case of the werewolf attack, you throw in, a bear. You throw in a thief. You throw in something that's sort of like, I'd call it a false start. It's something that's sort of, that's unrelated, that's like not directly connected to the general threat, like in this case the werewolf, but it's going to have some sort of tangential connection to it. In our werewolf story, a bear might be fleeing the werewolf's territory, or perhaps the thief is taking advantage of hysteria to try and make a quick buck. These are things that sort of flesh it out a bit more. They add a bit, from the player's point of view, they add a bit more depth to your world, but from your point of view, it's something to keep everyone interested. Especially, these will often sort of lead into the bigger story, because you can lure them into the woods. If, let's just say, the bear grabs a villager and pulls him into the forest, suddenly the players have something that they need to do. They need to go in and they need to sort of be pulled into the action, straight into the fire, so to speak. These sort of events are going to take place. The idea is you take them right after the players get familiarized with whatever their sort of main environment is. You give them enough time to get sort of calm and sort of get a little bit of the story. Then you jolt them. You throw them out. I'm gonna just say though, this differs depending on the genre of play that you're doing. This could be, if you're doing a really spooky horror campaign, this could be them investigating a room and they open a door and a dead body falls out. It could be something that simple. It could be, in case of a survival thing, finding out that their food's gone missing. Regardless of what it is, needs to be something that just gives a sharp jolt to their system, you know what I mean? Needs to be interesting, and it cannot spoil your big threat. Okay? Trent, you got anything sort of about this?
I'm reminded of the Coffin Rock Deadlands adventure, and I don't remember exactly, but I remember that it has to do with a cult running through town, basically ruining everybody's lives. And one of the things it's suggested you can do is you can have the cult having a demonstration and burning one of the quote-unquote sinners alive in the middle of the town square, because that always sets a first impression for the players.
Yeah, that's a perfect example, actually. Where, because in the case, let's just say in the case of the cult going through town, the players are eventually probably going to be storming a cult compound or finding out some dark secret about the cult, right? Like whatever it is. But this gives them a sort of, it's both violent, it's graphic, and it gives them an idea of the nature of the threat without sort of without sort of revealing your full hand, if you know what I mean. This is just, yeah, that's a perfect example. So from here, we're going to get into sort of the meat of it, actually. It's probably best just to move forward here. So this,
I'm just going to throw in, if I'm
yeah,
allowed.
Yeah, go ahead.
You need to give people incentive when you first start the campaign, or the one shot. But if you don't follow that up with that sort of hook, then their interest could falter. And if you don't, I mean, some people improvise very well and some people don't. But if you have an entire session planned and everyone decides to ignore it because the hook wasn't good enough, that sort of tends to derail things.
Yeah, the hook, that's probably what the actual term for what I'm thinking of is. Yeah, so that's actually completely right. I have had a session where it was, we're stuck in an abandoned city or like some random city underground. We all have amnesia, and we spent a good day, a character spent a good day, wandering around, talking to other people with amnesia, trying to figure out what's going on. And we got little pieces of it, but we never got anything that actually sort of set us out to find out the cause or stop it. Even when we eventually found out, there's a terrible wizard out there. My character's first impression is, but I don't want to go out and die. I mean, why don't we, bait him over here? Why don't we lure him into town? It was clear that the DM had sort of set up this whole series of caverns and sort of tricks and traps and monsters that we were supposed to go out and slay. But without any sort of real jolt to get us out of that sort of familiar environment we had thought up, my first impression was just, lock us down and create a big fort. It's not like he can get us now. So this sort of, I realized that I wasn't going to push this too hard, and eventually, one of the other players was nicer than me and sort of suggested that we go out and investigate, and I, took that as a sort of give for me to go, okay. Because it's mean to the DM, let's be honest, but in that case, it's because the DM needs to give you a reason to go out. Because especially if your players and if your character's any sort of if the player's character is any sort of survivalist, any sort of surviving against the odds, or a coward even, because cowards are hilarious and fun to have on your team, but without a real fire under their asses, a coward is not going to go out. You can't make them. So moving forward a bit, we're going to get into the twist. The twist is probably, it's one of the most fun parts, I'd say. This is the part where, so you have your players, they're familiar with their environment, and this is the part where you turn everything on its head, so to speak. It's not literally, of course. You're not going to completely mix things up, but your players are running about. Their blood is up because they just dealt with that sort of first hook threat, and this is the point where you're going to sort of make everything go wrong. So if the players are a commando unit, that found a hostage and they're about to get evac, right? The helicopter gets shot down. If the hunters were searching for the werewolf, this is where they find out that one of them is actually the werewolf. The werewolf's been hiding amongst them the whole time. Or, oh yeah, no, we do have a Discord. I actually, it's Hydra's Den. I'll put down. Actually, Trent, could you put down a link for it?
Yeah.
Yeah. So I haven't really been running any one shots, but honestly, I could go back to running my old one shots. I used to do it every once in a while. It was pretty fun, but interest kind of sort of waned a bit.
I've got one in the works right now, but it's been taking me a little longer to solidify it the way I want it before I'm willing to
Yeah,
play test with anyone.
of course. Yeah, no, I honestly just have a bunch of old one shots that I just kind of go through over and over again with new people because they're fun and they're easy to do. And you get different reactions each time, which is one of the best things I find about any sort of tabletop. Every time you run it is it's a different game, and one shots especially. It's just such a toss up. But on the point of the twist, this is actually, you know what? I forget what I said. This is definitely my favorite part because this is where the other shoe drops. This is where everyone gets to have their "ah shit" moment. The stakes are raised, and now to do or die. So mechanically speaking, like just going very meta for a second, this is where where you as the GM need to reveal the actual rules and conditions of this game. Okay. Before this point, the players have sort of a vague idea of what the game is. You know, it'll be but it's usually something relatively simple. And if you look at it, there's not a whole lot of game to what that original objective was. If the original objective is a bunch of space marines investigating an abandoned mining colony, that's not much of a game. If the space marines got to the abandoned mining colony and it actually was abandoned, then they get to go through a fantastic, sort of walking simulator where they go from room to room looking at it around and yep, it's abandoned, and then they finish and leave. So, I mean, this would both be very confusing and boring for people, but this would also serve, this really would just serve as a lesson in descriptive writing for the GM rather than any sort of actual game. So, instead, when those hypothetical space marines find the mining colony overrun with aliens, that's when the actual game is now revealed. Okay, this is where the twist happens. So now, in this case, the game is now battle the aliens, and maybe it's either escape or kill them all, or kill the queen, or blow up the station. The twist basically serves to reveal the true mechanics, the true sort of game that is actually going on. If you know what I mean, Trent, you follow?
Yeah, no. One of my favorites, and this is kind of a cliche. So you have a bunch of people, maybe they're traveling through the wilderness in the middle of winter, and they find out that they're being stalked by a pack of cannibals. Now, your first idea, a lot of people's first idea is that that's the main threat, and yeah, it is for a while. And then you find out that they're also running from something, and it's like a massive, very powerful Wendigo spirit, something like that. Always, I enjoy having those sort of toss-ups where some people expect the twist to be that that's the enemy that's following them, and then it's something far worse. And yeah, it's a cliche, but people tend to enjoy it.
Yeah, precisely. But so when I'm referring to this though, the really most important point I'd say out of the twist is that this twist is where you've gone from a sort of vague one, like in your case, where the story could basically be before it's escape from the cannibals, survive. These are very vague concepts. They don't really have a sort of goal in mind. But the moment that you introduce the Wendigo, I would honestly think that you probably also get, like, if you don't provide a direct escape pattern, and you've basically established that the Wendigo is going to catch them, the story has basically been established now. And what the actual sort of mechanics is your team versus the Wendigo. That is the actual game, right?
Yeah, kill the Wendigo.
Exactly. Before that, you've got this sort of vague objective, and the players don't know exactly what's going on. It's an important point to have, where people are just kind of searching out and they're trying to learn things as they go. But this twist is so important because that's when it goes from being this sort of vague adventure to an actual, game. It goes from creative writing into game writing. It's once again in the case of the three of us going through with with our little sort of adventurers in Amnesia Land. It was that point would basically be where we actually encountered the wizard, and it was time fight the wizard. The twist doesn't always have to be with that in mind. The twist doesn't always have to be a actual story twist. Usually, it's going to be a story twist because that's usually the way it works. People love their plot twist. But what I'm really referring to is the point where the actual meat of the game is established. Because without the meat of the game being established, people are going to get bored, and they will make their own games. And when people make their own games in your one shot, that's when things go to hell. So, with that in mind, though, I'd like to talk about, there is one little thing I kind of missed, which was, I'm going to call them the in-between phases. They have a bunch of names. These are the little scenes in between each of the big sort of things. In between your sort of hook and the twist. In between the hook and the beginning. In between the twist and the climax. There's going to be these little sort of beats that happen. These don't always have to occur, by the way, and some people call them padding, but I've personally put in at least one of them before the climax of the one shot. These mini phases are going to be points where the players are either dealing with fodder or non-important threats, puzzles. Maybe they're unlocking a briefcase that gives them a special item that will help greatly in the climax encounter. I can't give you an exact idea of what these are, since they're super varied, since they're all sorts of things, but the main idea is these are cooldown periods between the big points of player action. If you looked at it as a sort of graph, it would be like, a straight action going up, and you have these little dips, and that's what these in-between phases really represent. Actually, a crazy thing is some of these can actually be action. Like I said before, if we're dealing with fodder, in an action-oriented game, sort of Warhammer 40k or any sort of other things with ridiculously huge space marine types, they could have these fights where, let's just say, the quest is to find and destroy the alien queen. Any of the small encounters with the aliens, these are going to end super fast. They're going to be sort of points where you're just kind of reinforcing strength in your players, The point is to remember that these are just kind of points to slow down. If they feel particularly strong and they're just slamming through everything, that's fine. That's actually really good, because the idea here is that if you keep up at high tension all the time, your players are going to get burnt out. Even if it's only a one-shot, even if it's just going for a little bit, it could just, like other ideas, it could be talking with an NPCs, it can be, solving a puzzle. There's so many different things it can be, but without these pauses, the players are just, basically the idea is these are points where the player's not at risk of losing, so that they can just, unclench their butt for a little bit. And the most important thing really is by doing this, adding these sort of relaxed points makes the actual points of tension just that much more intense, because if you just do non-stop action, people get desensitized, people get, burnt out. But if you give a pause and then you go back at it, this is something, going back to the movies, this is something that movies have mastered, is, there'll always be a spot before the final battle, a big bad fight, the final infiltration, whatever it is. There'll always be nice little pauses. Might be a brief point of comedy. It might be whatever it is. It's just take a breather, cooler
It
break.
would be something like out of the darkest dungeon when the party's sitting around a campfire late at night trying to calm down. You can have incentivize a little bit of role playing.
Exactly. Yeah, fantastic example actually. That, and I mean, even without that, in a darkest dungeon example, the climax is going to be the final boss, of that dungeon that you're going through. Even those points where they're just walking down a hall. You're walking down the hall, there's a few traps maybe, there's a little bit of loot to loot. Those points are cooldown periods, because if you remove those, just imagine, for those of you who actually have played the Darkest Dungeon, take out all of the hallways, take out all the traps, all that stuff, and just put encounter after encounter after encounter. Imagine that. That'd be boring. so abysmally boring.
Keep in mind the idea, the 5-room dungeon is something that's always a really great concept to explain to beginners.
I haven't heard this one.
So the 5-room dungeon is the idea that you can have a dungeon that lasts exactly 5 rooms, and this can be extrapolated to a larger game, but it basically means that every single room of this dungeon needs to have something going for it. You can't just have, you can have like dips, yeah, maybe one of them's like room 2, for example, could be a puzzle, or maybe it's like a diplomacy challenge. Not one where you're rolling dice, but you're trying to convince a character. You've done this in your games before, even if you don't know you're doing it. And it's the idea that, you know, you have your entrance, you figure out how to get inside. Indiana Jones, he's trying to get into the temple, or I haven't actually seen the movie in a very long time. Room 3 might be a trap. You know, Legend of Zelda does that pretty well.
Yeah.
Sort of those things. You have your big battle, and then your final room would be the reward, and you can extrapolate it to a larger dungeon system. But it's the idea that each room has something going for it, because you want to keep your players entertained. And if you just have long, empty hallways where there's nothing going on, people will start doing other things. As we both know from running sessions,
Of course.
people will start playing on their phones.
Yeah. But at the same time, I would argue that while making long, empty hallways is not a good idea, making hallways that are filled with stuff isn't actually a bad idea either, because if you just have room to room, you know, a trial of challenges, like their 5-room dungeon idea, if every room was high octane, it would be murder. It would be absolutely, it would burn out people. In one shots, it's not quite as much of a problem, because, you know, you're only doing it once, but it's people are going to get distracted, and the moment that they get distracted, they look back, and suddenly, you know, things have gone 5 steps forward, and everything's completely different. They're going to be like, what the heck is going on? And that's when they completely disengage. Those little cooldown periods, maybe all they missed when they went to take a piss was you guys, you know, disarmed a trap. In our Darkest Dungeon example, they, you know, just went down a hallway to disarm the trap. So I know we're kind of giving a little bit different, but I'd actually argue that the 5-room dungeon, it's extrapolating it to the point. The only difference between Trent's idea and mine is, I would say in a 5-room dungeon idea, give a slight break between each one, in the terms of something that's just slightly less intense. Maybe I'm just not reading this right, Trent, or.
No, yeah. If the players need to take a rest, there's the infamous Dungeons and Dragons rest period, and people will do it all the time. I'm not a big fan of it. Some people will just say, okay, you rest and you wake up the next day. That's boring. You want to, if it's a role-playing game. Obviously, some people aren't great at role-playing, or they're not necessarily into it. Everyone needs to give it a try. You might find out you love it.
Yeah.
And the best way to do that is to have those downtime periods. I'm not saying that every single room needs to be one after the other immediately, but you want to populate your session, but also have room for, you know, extra stuff.
Yeah. I personally despise the idea of resting in the dungeon, only because people will use it as a mechanical way of, the wizard needs to prepare this certain spell, so everyone take 10. I just find that absolutely ridiculous, just because in terms of actual, I like to view it from an actual, like, in-game perspective, and it almost seems hilarious to me, the idea of, you know, a burly bunch of adventurers going through, and the wizard goes, okay, everybody take 10, I need to prepare my spell.
Yeah, and then there's that bullshit, I forget what the name of it, the name of the spell exactly, but it creates a magical shelter hovering above the ground. People have a rope ladder, climb up the rope ladder into the house, and then they spend the night in there prepping in the middle of the dungeon. I hate that to the point where I've straight up told people that the spell does not work inside of dungeons. You can use it in the wilderness, but it's just a cheap way of. If
you're giving someone a safety bubble.
Yeah, if your wizard or spellcaster wants to blow their entire stack in the first couple of rooms of a dungeon in the first few minutes of a session, let them, but then they have to deal with the consequences later. Otherwise, there's no point in playing a role-playing game. A lot of it is cause and effect and risk-taking.
Yeah, no, you're definitely right, where I didn't even think of that. Like, I guess I wasn't even thinking of the full consequences of that. The idea that someone can completely refresh their spells in the middle of the dungeon. That's like, oh, that's terrible. I actually switched. I kind of moved away from fantasy in terms of when I started doing my one shots, because and what I usually do instead is I would give someone limited ammo. You know, you have like 3 clips for your pistol. You can't, sit around and those pistol clips are going to come back. There's no pistol clips lying around in the middle of the tundra. No, you've got 3 pistol clips. Make them count. If you blow your load early, well, have fun stabbing the Yeti to death. Because I'm not giving you more bullets.
In respects to classic D&D, because I'm sure that's what a lot of people know more of.
Of course.
The wizard can handle any situation, but they're only effective for a limited amount of time. And if you allow people to abuse mechanics like that and take those rest periods, then it defeats the purpose. Everybody always talks about the fighter wizard power dynamic and how a fighter can never approach it. The whole point of the fighter is that they can keep going. The wizard is a glass cannon, a one and done sort of situation, and you have to work around that. The whole point of being a wizard is that you're playing a smart character, and a smart character doesn't dump their combat spells in the first encounter, and you do have to punish that. And yes, people will be mad, but that's the point. Again, that's the point of the game.
Yeah, I mean, a little controversial there. I'm sure some people are going to get on your butt for that, but no, I agree. And but let's get back onto one shots though. To be honest, because a lot of this, I would hope, doesn't get into it too much in one shots, because at this point we're going to be reaching towards probably another. I'm going to keep saying this, most important point, because every point is most important, really, when you think about it. Because a good session is going to be like a nicely cooked meal, like a nicely cooked dinner. Having that big turkey is nice, but you got to have your potatoes, you got to have your greens. You just have the turkey by itself, and you're going to just feel awful, and it's terrible for you. Unless you're one of those kinds who devours a whole turkey by themselves. And if you are, you intimidate me, sir, and do not go near my kitchen. So, we're going to talk about the climax now. The climax, while the twist is my favorite part, a lot of people will, prefer the climax because, especially, players will love the climax. DMs may love the twist, but players will love the climax because this is the high point of your one shot. This is the most memorable, where the most memorable moments come out. This is where all the sort of stories about it, where everyone talks about, hey, you remember that time where we're doing this, that, and the other, and people are like, yeah, that was so cool. That's the climax usually, and because it's so memorable for the players, you better do it well. So, depending on the themes and genre that you're working with, this point is going to vary wildly in terms of its length and in terms of its composition. But there are a few key points to remember, okay? So, first, once again, this is the most important scene or scenes in the one-shot for your players. This is what the entire story was building towards. Typically, after completing this part, the ride is over, or the rest of the way will be considerably easier. There will be typically no threat to the players after this. So, if your players can beat this point, they're done. So, make it memorable, make it dramatic, make it spectacular. Do whatever you have to do. Play music. If you're doing it live, start a fire, jump on your table and start screaming. I don't care what you have to do, but make sure they have that sort of memorable moment, whether it's a tank bursting through the wall and bearing down on some Allied soldiers in World War II, whether it's the final stand of commandos in a foreign land, or the discovery of the alien queen. The
Nazis successfully released the ancient evil.
Exactly. This is the moment. This is you need to give it some oomph. Play as much as you can to the senses. Provide all the crazy details you want. And for the love of all that is good, do not make it boring. I cannot stress this enough. If this is boring, or if this goes by too fast, you've ruined it. You've ruined the whole thing, and, you're going to be, I'm sorry, because a lot of new GMs are going to get a little tense with me saying this, but you've screwed up, buddy. You're done. Because there's this whole idea of, tension that people build up, and movies talk about this a lot, where there's this natural sort of tension that people will build up for themselves. It's sort of just an anxiety. It's a sort of energy, and the idea is that when you get to the climax, all of that tension is going to be released. Catharsis. If that tension is not released, then what happens instead is it's going to cause this sort of weird feeling for your players. They're going to be confused. They're going to be unsure what to do at first, but then they're going to get angry because it's like it's blue balling someone. It's you work them up.
Shooting the Master Swordsman in Indiana Jones worked because we could see how tired Indy was. It would have a very different effect on players in real life.
But what I'm saying is that case, even the way it's played up, well, first off, I would argue that isn't even the climax of it, but that's just one of the points of action. But if that had been the finale, that would have been terrible. Actually, now that I think about it, I would argue that cannot be something like that cannot be the climax.
If I may, I still remember one of your first times running a game for us when the big bad got killed by a sling in the opening.
Oh, freaking hell, yes. That was not only disappointing, I'm sure, for the players, and I'm sure you were a little disappointed by that whole thing.
I actually thought it was hilarious, but it was a little irritating to have the entire encounter end in a single round.
Yeah, not only is it irritating for the players, but as a GM, if you've set up something like that, it just kills you to see that happen, because, you've just lost it all. So, as I've said, movies have become a master of playing this out. So, if you need to go out and watch a movie again, do it. Just without that payout, all that tension will drive people up the wall. Once again, do not make it boring. I've had it happen enough times to me. You can't do that, man. So, point 2 is actually a little bit to this effect. The question is, how do you make sure it's not boring? So, first way you do this, bug testing on your final event. A little thought here can go a long way. If you gave the adventurers a bunch of items or one-use spells to take on that evil wizard, take some time and think about what those spells do. Good example. That that when I was talking, I've talked about it a few times now. That story where we were 3 adventurers with amnesia going through this underground cavern to fight a wizard. The DM made a terrible mistake of giving us 3 spells, 2 of which were a spell that creates a wall and a spell that creates poison gas. So.
Oh, now I know what you're talking about.
Yeah. So, in that case, sadly, the DM, much to the DM's chagrin, we locked the doors and we gassed the wizard. And that was it. There was this amazing wizard, but we just locked him in a room and we just waited for the banging to stop on the walls. And then we just walked in and cleaned up. That is such a disappointing thing, and it ruined the experience, to be honest. It's funny. Like, a lot of these sort of payoff things are funny because it's not what you expected, A lot of humor comes from, defeating, going against expectation. But while it's funny, it's also a little, it ruins it a little. You can only do that a certain number of times. Like, you can also do that if if you wanted to make a comedic one, then you got to go all in on that comedic one. If, let's just say they had that sort of ridiculous, if you have that sort of ridiculous letdown, you have to set it up, you have to make sure you've set it up so that, first off, you know that the players are going to mess it up that way, and secondly, so that when they do, it's that much more hilarious.
Or hell, I've had that happen to me before, and you just do the classic James Bond thing of having, it was not the real villain, it was a body double, and some people hate it, some people love it, but it keeps the game going.
Yeah, no, that too, but and that's a nice one if you have a little bit of thought put in, because once again, this little bit of bug testing is going to also be about things like that. If you think that they might one-shot it and you can't get around it, then set up a contingency for if they one-shot it, because if they one-shot it and you have not given them something afterwards, it's going to suck. And everyone's going to be very disappointed with you. Another example, if you give players a bandolier of grenades to take on an ancient demon, Do not make this bandolier of grenades sufficiently powerful to one-shot the demons, unless the demon is not like. I'm trying to think. If you give them if you give them a bandolier of grenades when they're taking on, like the ancient demon and his cult or whatever, do not make the bandolier able to one-shot the demon. Make sure that the bandolier of grenades is going to be used somewhere else. If it's used on the demon, maybe it seriously wounds him, but perhaps it would be a bit better for it to have been used stopping down the cult who's trying to summon him. The point that I'm trying to say, I'm getting a little muddled here, but the point that I'm trying to say here is take a little bit of time, think about what you're doing, and consider, will this break the game? Just by taking a little bit of time and doing this, you can sort of fix all sorts of stuff. I've had this happen before to me, where I knew the players were going to try and one-shot, so I set up a bunch of stuff just in case that happens. And you can add a little bit of humor if the players just pull it again. Like in the case of, I had one where they tried to one-shot a necromancer, who they kept plaguing his existence. And so he had a contingency in place where, when it goes straight from stage 1 into stage 2, there's no stage 1 fight, he just goes straight into his big bad form. And he, makes a little point of, stop going straight for me, and he gets very angry because the players just ruined his little evil monologue. This gives the players some humor, and then also gives them the chance to have their final boss. So, with these in mind, my final key point is going to be make sure everyone is relevant. Because remember, this is a one-shot. This is all of the game that they're going to be having, unless you decide to make a sequel. So, if you have 4 players and only one of them is needed to fix the spaceship that's required to save everyone, give the other players something to do. Make it so that the player fixing the spaceship has something interesting to do as well. If you get to the final action and one person is spending their turns repeatedly rolling a die I roll to fix the spaceship, you've ruined their experience. If everyone else is having this epic battle to fight off all the zombies while one guy spends his turns rolling, that guy's gonna feel like he hasn't done much. So since keeping them engaged is so important, it might be something as simple as, in that case, give them a set of puzzles to work on. It could be, okay, you're fixing that spaceship, solve this set of puzzles, you have this much time. And every time you don't finish it, it goes on to your next turn, and we continue your timer to finish this set of puzzles. It could be something like that. My point here is, Climax is a time for everybody to shine. Every player needs to have a specific challenge. It has to be something related to what they do. And while you may not know what sort of character they'll make beforehand, you can always improvise. And you can always think up things on the spot, but make sure that everybody is invested and everybody gets to have their turn in the big final scene. Everyone needs to have their own show of glory. Okay? But there's one unless on this, which is, unless you're playing a survival game with high stakes, or a death game, or any sort of thing where people are going to be dropping all the time, then anything goes, really, because people are going to die all the time anyways. Then you're going to have a whole other set of concerns. But I mean, honestly, even when I'm saying that, no, I'd say it's still a very important point to have, which is keep those surviving people interested and make sure that they understand that they are really by the seams of their pants here. Trent, you want to add anything to this?
Yeah. One suggestion, and this goes back to one of your earlier points. Don't design your encounter in a vacuum. One of my favorite things to do as a game master is to have all of my players create their characters a session beforehand, and if I feel like it, and if you feel like it, you can take that time to run those characters through the encounter and see how they would react to certain situations. Build it around the party capabilities. You don't want to make it substantially more powerful, but if you design an encounter in a vacuum without access to the characters, you could end up with a one-and-done situation where it just ends unsatisfactorily.
Yeah, no, you're completely right. I assume when you mean run the characters, that you're saying like run their characters through it, don't actually show the player.
Oh, no. You do it yourself. You set up a little scenario and you find out how the characters mechanically react to things.
Yeah, precisely. You're completely right. If you don't have access to that, there's always the opportunity for you to improvise and add something, but just make sure that you, like, heck, I would actually, like, this is like I've actually considered doing, which is keep a stock of little sort of mini puzzles and challenges just on the side, just so that if it comes down to a stupid mechanical, you have to fix this thing in this amount of time thing, because that will happen from time to time, or you have to pick these locks, so that I have something I could just give to someone. I could be like, here, do this. Not for everyone, but considering what your players are going to be bringing and considering what you want to set up, finding the sort of happy balance between the two is going to be where you find your perfect climax. Sexual jokes aside. So,
It's one of the reasons why I like some of the more not to say that they're simplistic, but some of the more mechanically light systems like Savage Worlds, Fate, Paranoia, where situations could be very easily tailored. D&D, it's a little more difficult because of all the numbers involved.
yeah, no, precisely. So, at this point, I'm actually going to open up the Q&A and the Discord. So, if anybody is interested in joining at this point, I am opening.
I'll put a little thing in.
Yeah. Oh, what the heck was that? I don't know. I just thought I heard something. Anyway, so I'm going to, if you want to make a note in the announcements that Q&A is now open. I think the recording is probably going to end here. So this part's going to be up on YouTube, and anything after this is just going to, probably be free floating on Twitch unless we get some really good pieces. If this is where we end, then I hope you all have a good day, and I hope you have some good sessions.